بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وأمر أهلك بالصلاة واصطبر عليها. My dear respected brothers, elders, sisters, mothers and beloved youngsters, wherever you may be, first and foremost, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My personal request, if there are any youngsters who are not baligh yet, I would strongly urge you not to participate in this talk and discussion, because we may be discussing certain things quite frankly and openly, and it may not be quite appropriate for you. Other than that, everybody is welcome to participate, and inshallah we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put khair and barakah in our gathering and in our participation in this gathering, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whosoever remembers me in the heart, in the tanhayi, in the aloneness, I also remember them, and whosoever remembers me in a gathering, I also remember them in a better gathering. So this is also a dhikr, this is also a remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are collectively remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is great. So first and foremost, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from all of us. So coming back to today's topic, we wanted to continue with our discourse or discussion on the engagement with the child, because we've had a number of questions and a number of queries afterwards, and we wanted to extend this a bit more, and as we did not finish of the principle that I wanted to discuss last week. So I'm going to briefly catch up on what we discussed last week. So last week we talked about compatibility and values between spouses, and in order for us to even get a child, we need to be married first and foremost. That is our passport to, that is the key to meeting of two human beings, two spouses, and then that marriage, we talked about the purpose, the objective, the aim, and how it's supposed to be done. Then we also talked about the purpose, objective, and purpose and responsibilities within a marriage. And the greatest, and what I emphasize greatly on, is the compatibility, compatibility between two person. And if you look into the hadith, Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala under his authority, it's narrated that the religious element should be prioritized over everything else, over beauty, over wealth, over nasab, etc., etc. So what that basically means, and those of you who are married, and I remember saying that last week, you will testify to this and attest to this, usually the honeymoon period lasts for 6 months, 9 months, up to 12 months. Then afterwards, what it is a compromisation between two human beings, and learning to deal with each other's deficiencies and nooks, and working together for a common objective. And that is usually looking after a child for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and attaining the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that under the day of judgment we can stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in qiyamah and say, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I fulfill my obligation in terms of caring for the child. Because majority of us know that caring for a child and making that child successful will ultimately lead to us having a free bank account in the hereafter. Literally, when I say free bank account, this bank account will be bank account of sawab, not money, not thing like that, but it will be as soon as you pass away. If the child is neck, what happens? That person will make dua for you, and you will continue to get good deeds written on your behalf, and your ranks in the hereafter will continue to go up and up and up and up. And if your son or daughter happens to be a hafiz, subhanallah, subhanallah, and I say again, subhanallah, if your daughter or son is a hafiz again, or a scholar or an alim, subhanallah, on the day of judgment, you know, when there's millions and billions of people going to be there, everybody's going to be parashan, everybody's going to be, what is going to happen to me? A child will be running away from from the parents, a parents will be running away from a child, and so forth and so forth. The situation is going to be so volatile and so dangerous and so, full of worry and anxiety on that day when the hisab nisab is taking its place, a person who is hafiz, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them a throne on the parent's head, and they will be surprised. Why have I got a what have I got a crown on my head, rather, sorry. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell them, because you made your son or daughter become hafiz. And that's the reward. That's one of the reward of making your child hafiz. So that itself will be, then the entire world will look at you with awe and with respect and muhabbat, say, oh, so and so is wearing this crown. It's so powerful, shining like a sun, and everybody will know that you are a father of a or a mother of a hafiz. So these are some of the great the rewards for looking after the child in the right way. We also know that child is a means of zakhira for us in terms of the barakah in our rizq. It's a means for us to be perpetual, eternal sadaqah jariyah and bank, passive income, as they say in English. So I went greatly discussing in depth about the compatibility between two partners. Then when the child comes, the learning starts from the day of conception. And especially when the ruh is given into the child, typically around 4 months, what happens? The lived experience of the mother is so important that child will naturally inherit all that behavior, all the emotions, all the feelings, and to a certain extent some DNA too. And yes, some as they say, it's okay, the word has literally slipped my mind. Generational. They inherit genes, and that will happen as well. So environment and the lived experience, so important. So we talked about, and then the child is innocent. When the child is born, according to the hadith, child is innocent. All of them are born al-fitra. But the environment has such a significant impact that you literally make the child into a byproduct of the society. And there's many studies done in terms of social science subjects. It talks about the pressure and the environment and what the child is exposed to. Majority of that will have impact on that. Therefore, the TV, the magazines, the music, your arguments, or your fighting, or your recitation of Quran, or your studying, whatever you're doing, whatever you experience, child will also copy that and pick that up. So from that, what I wanted to lead on to, and specifically today, I wanted to cover about role models, behavior management, and about independent learning. These are some of the key elements for a child to become the future leader tomorrow. Initially, the child is a, if you look at it from a Quranic verse, and if you look at it from right from the root, it's a water, fluid. From the fluid, it becomes a child, fetus. Then from fetus, a child. From child to a young toddler to a teenager, from teenager to grown adult, then elderly person, and that's how the human cycle operates. So but before we go into the lectures, I want you to do an exercise with you which will be helpful towards the last part, which is the behavior management and independent learning. You see, before the pandemic took place, majority of us were working 9 to 5, or we were in a fast-paced, busy environment. We hardly got to see our children hardly got to see us. All of us were busy in our individual activities. So one of the key things, or one of the key information that used to come to me is, I just don't have time, I'm so stressed out. So what happens is, one of my great friends, he used to say, before we go home, it's a little exercise that we should always do. And that is, after a hard day of work, or hard days of involvement in stressful activities, take yourself out, spend 5 to 10 minutes on yourself just resting. Just close your eyes and just rest. Put your alarm on, snooze on, the Zuhr Salah around in the afternoon time, Sunnah for Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Similar, you do the latter part of the evening. What happens is, when you go home, the first thing that your spouses, your siblings, your little children, they come running towards you, or typically they want your full attention. And that attention is usually for 15 to 20 stuff. But if you're tired, what do you want to do? Especially those people who work in in stressful jobs, they just want to sit down, take the clothes off, the uniform, etc. off, and just relax and do nothing. Typically, but that's anti everybody wants your time, you don't want their time. If you had that 5-10 minutes rest before you came in, then you will be psychologically, emotionally, physically ready for that. That's also, but we'll talk about that. There's a few more techniques that we can talk about. So we talked about compatibility. We talked about learning takes place in the early stages. So second thing that I wanted to talk about is about us being great role models. About us being role models. And again, it goes back to the statement that I made. A child will always learn what we are doing. So one of the key things that we tend to do at this moment is we need to first and foremost ask ourselves, who are we? That is the key thing. Because if you're a Muslim, you need to behave in certain ways. If you're a doctor, you behave in certain ways. If you're a social worker, you behave in certain ways. If you're an imam of masjid, you behave in certain ways. If you're working in a factory, working in a restaurant, working in whatever profession you are in, you behave in certain ways. So for us, our aim and our purpose is to bring that child up to be the future leader, to be tomorrow's leader, to be tomorrow's doctor, to be tomorrow's alim, to be tomorrow's hafiz, to be tomorrow's engineer, to be tomorrow's prime minister. Whatever it may be, every parent wants their child to be the future leader. But if you're not involved in educating that person, if we are not involved in helping that person, if you're not able to engage with that person, but rather between the two spouses, you're too busy arguing, you're too busy fighting, you're too busy using foul languages. And again, I reiterate the point. If we are, what are we doing? We come in home and listen to bad music or any type of music. Music is not allowed in the first place. Or we are involved in lying and stealing and making false promises to our children. And then what happens? That has negative connotations. Children learn by watching. Children learn by observing. Children learn by following. Because they story, they feel it. And as I said before, your brain, the front part of the brain, records everything. All the lived experience, the 5 experiences, the 5 senses experience, it is recorded continuously. So remember, being a role model doesn't only necessarily mean just going to work and being a great example, a hard worker. No, it also means how you deal with your wife, how you deal with the child's parents, how you deal with your own parents, the child's grandparents. It also means how you deal with the neighbor. It also means how you deal with the strangers that are out there. When you're driving, how are you driving? If the child is behind you and you are getting frustrated and you're angry and sticking finger at somebody else and what else, I don't know, you're screaming loudly and profanities, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala safeguard us from that. And it happens. Road rage, road rage and all that things. And the child is watching there and the child is picking all the bad habits. So instead of bad habits, we have to show by being an example to the child. Because the child always wants to be, the greatest role model for that child is the parents. They want to be like their parents. They want to replicate their parents. However, whatever the way that the parents are, the child will always want to be like that. If there's discomfort and there's disharmony and there's no tranquility between husband and wife, that disturbances will affect the child. I mean, but if anybody, any teachers here watching, be it a maktab teacher, any type of teacher, be it a school teacher or college teacher or university teacher, they will tell you, or they will concur with this statement, is that typically a naughty child, there is no such thing as per naughty child. And the teachers will say that child is their behavior is a result of what they see or what they experience and they're not being tranquil at home. Because the relationship between the spouses are not great, the child displays naughtiness, bad behavior, etc., etc. Of course, there's exceptions. There's learning disabilities involved. There's autism involved, and there's ADHD, and many other different factors involved. That's completely different. But in a typical scenario, if the child is not content at home, and child will not be content at home if their parents are constantly arguing and fighting. If the parents are constantly and continuously fighting and arguing with the child, that will have a significant impact on the child. So therefore, us being the greatest role model, experience, we are defeating the objective of being a role model. So therefore, we are not fulfilling our task. If we are not fulfilling our task, then we are letting ourselves down. We are also letting our child down. So therefore, we have to think about the long-term future of that child. And as I said before, a child's future can be determined by how dysfunctional a family home is. If the family home is dysfunctional, the child will definitely, according to research that is, will experience mental health at some point. So that's one of them. And I mean, look, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاسْتَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, order your family to read salah. Order your family to read salah and remain steadfast on that and firm on that. So this is something that we need to do. We have to educate our family. We have to educate our children. And that's where teaching and ta'allum comes in. So if a child is doing something wrong, we have to be quick and fast and we have to help them. I mean, look, if you don't remind a child at the age of 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, are you going to tell that person when he's 18 and 19 and 20, when that person has developed these habits? Because remember, changing habits doesn't happen overnight. I mean, there's a saying in our culture, if you haven't learned it at the age of 27, you are definitely not going to learn it at the age of 27. It just goes to habits are very, very dangerous. So if the child is forming habits, eating with the left hand, going to the toilet with the right foot, not praying the du'as, not praying the salah, and swearing at other people. For example, our school environment can be quite dangerous at times, playground especially. If they're picking up foul languages and they're using it at home innocently, we can't laugh it off. We need to remind that child gently and kindly and nicely. That does not mean we start shouting and screaming and we start swearing at them back. Patani, what kind of language we use, some of us. We need to be extremely mindful of that. Why we have to be extremely mindful of that is Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his nature was so kind. He was kind even to his enemies. How many of us are kind to our enemies? Especially those people who try to hurt us. I'm going to get you back. If not now, definitely tomorrow. If not tomorrow, definitely next year. This is the kind of attitude that we have. But Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, despite his chehre mubarak, his body mubarak, his feet mubarak, being hit with stones and rock in Taif, what did he do? What did Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? He showed mercy and he showed rahmah. He showed mercy and rahmah. And famous stories are he was more respectful and more merciful and more compassionate towards the youngsters. And there's a hadith, those who are not compassionate towards the youngsters are not amongst us. So what did Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? The famous story, quite a few famous stories, and as I mentioned last week as well, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam delayed his farz salah just to show the importance of being kind and gentle towards the youngsters. And the famous hadith, another one, a Dihati came and he said, oh, you kiss the boys and you kiss the child. I've never kissed a child. And Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what am I supposed to do if the rahmah has been taken away from your heart? So, and then Anas ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was in the khidmat of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for 10 years. 10 years at the khidmat of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not even his own child. But he never ever rebuked him. Never ever rebuked him. There's no history of him ever rebuking the child. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He did not even say, why did you do this or did that? Rather, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was involved in showing compassion and love and involved in teaching the children gently and kindly. There was a child, what did he do? He was putting his hands and he was putting his fingers in different plates and different foods. And what did Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? He said, Ya ghulam, sammillaha ta'ala wa kul biyaminik wa kul mimma yalik. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling the child or youngster, take the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and eat from what's in front of you and say Bismillahi wa ala barakatillah. So you can see straight away, he did not shout at him. He did not tell him off. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was rather involved in showing compassion to the child and teaching that person so that person builds good positive habits for future. Because remember, that child who is child today, you were a child once upon a time, I was a child once upon a time, your child is going to be an adult once in the future. So if you are not able to prepare that child for tomorrow, nobody else will prepare that child for you. And if you absolutely love your child, and mashallah, majority of the people do love their child, sincerely, or everybody loves the child sincerely, it's just that people have showing the love in a different way, then you will want the best for your child. So preparing the child starts at the early stages. But to prepare the child, we have to be prepared ourselves. What do I mean by ourselves? If we don't know the right thing from the wrong, if we don't know what Sunnah is, if we don't know what Quran is, if we don't know the barakah and the blessings and the reward of looking after a child, then how are we going to teach that child? And that's the difficult part. So role models and about teaching, we have to be constantly involved in teaching the child. For example, how many of us, if you are sitting together on the floor eating with the 3 fingers, the child will ask you a question, Daddy, Mommy, why are you sitting on the floor? When I go to my friend's house, they're sitting on the table. Why are we sitting on the table? And if you read loudly, Bismillahi wa ala barakatillah, or you read loudly before you enter the toilet with the left foot, before you enter, you say, you read the dua, the child will follow and ask you, why are you reading that? That's called embedded learning. Everyday learning by doing. Learning by doing. According to some research, that embedded learning is far more powerful, far more effective, far more, it's better than sitting in a formal classroom-based teaching experiences. So it's embedded learning means everyday usage, everyday activities, every day. For example, if I'm walking from here to the end of the masjid, so if I say 1, 2, 3, how many safs? There's 15 safs, for example. That's you teaching the child how to count. Then if you say, if I add 2 more, how many is that? 17. So you're adding and calculation. Similarly, if you say to the child, there's 30 Ramadan, we have finished 15, Ramadan is finished today, how many left? So you're teaching the child using everyday objectives, everyday activities, everyday things. And that is, alhamdulillah, thanks to the pandemic, thanks to the COVID-19, everybody is involved learning at home by doing things. And there are also activities, our children activities that takes place on a daily basis at 12 o'clock. You can also learn things from there as well. So the point is, we have to be involved in teaching our child using whatever means. We don't have to be the greatest teacher, but you can be the greatest teacher by simply following the Sunnah and Hadith. Simple as that. For example, you're sleeping. Before sleeping, what are you doing? Read the dua, read some Quran, talk about the all day, how the day been. So you're bonding with the child. We are bonding with the child. Then that child is sleeping, is content that this is my primary carer, this is my mother, this is my father. They're involved in putting me to sleep. Then that child goes to sleep content at night time. Then wakes up, first thing he sees you after waking up, the Quran says you, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Then sees you, what happened? The child feels secure. The child feels secure. That way the attachment and the relationship with the child and the parents grows stronger. The child also feels more confidence, in impacts on the confidence level, impacts on how they're feeling inside of them. And that's why when a child is in a single family household, or going through a divorce background, or the child is going through a broken family relationship, what happens? Child is always on the edge. Child is always misbehaving because they're not secure. The secure base, that foundation of relationship between the two persons and the parents and the child is fractured. And that's why the child starts bedwetting, that's why the child starts fighting, that's why the child starts pushing other people, using foul language. They don't know how to express their inner feelings. So what happens? They display through behavior. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from any of this behavior, especially if you're going through difficult times. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviates that. So role model, teaching, behavior management. Remember, behavior management is shafqat ke saath, pyar ke saath, muhabbat ke saath, with respect, with love and with value. And we have to show kindness to the child. But before I further elaborate on this a bit more, is there any questions?
What is the difference between being loving and being permissive?
Being loving and being permissive. Something allowed. Okay, mashallah. It's quite a bit of a philosophical question, to be honest with you. First and foremost, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you khair. And second of all, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me the tawfiq to answer this question correctly. Okay, love is something that people show in many different ways. Love can be shown through verbalizing your internal emotions and telling them how much you love them, how much you care for them. One person's love will be different from another person's love, and sometimes our love can make you do something crazy, something that's not allowed, something that's not permissive. The famous story, Layla Majnoon, if I were to say, and other stories in this modern day, we tend to do so many. Love can and the passion can drive you to do certain things. For example, our buzrugs, our elders, they were so passionate about certain things. For example, Durood Salatu Salam on Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They would continuously pray that, and there's no harm. There's the hadith. You can there's do zikr in all state, sitting down, sleeping to a certain extent, or talking, walking. That people start calling you majnoon. That's the ultimate level of zikr. So what is permissive and what is love? I mean, it depends on the context and on the situation. For example, if you are in love with a girl and that's a haram relationship, that's not permissible at all. First and foremost, you cannot be in love with a girl because you're doing something haram. If you're doing something haram, then it's not allowed. That love is invalid, and it should something you should do tawbah. We should do tawbah. Stay away from that. However, if something is permissible, for example, praying Quran, then we should have excessive love for that. We should be very, very loving. So for our child, we have to look at it is the activity my child will do. A, will it be beneficial for in the future? B, is it jaiz in Islamic perspective according to Sunnah and Hadith? And if it's jaiz, why not? Let's do that. Sometimes we have to be harsh to be kind to the child. For example, if the child is stealing or taking things away from other people's pockets when they're praying, are you going to say, you know what, I love you, my dear child, I'm not going to say anything to you. Carry on, better, it's okay. MashaAllah. Continue. You're not going to do that. Why are you not going to do that? Because there are severe consequences afterwards. Similarly, if your child is not praying Salah, then we need to order that child to pray Salah. Especially if they're 7 and 10, then we need to start. 7, we need to be forthright, and at the age of 10, a bit more. And we can turn that into a different angle. If the child is not doing something, let's make a chart, let's make a reward chart. If the child has learning disabilities, what we can do, make everything visualized with characteristics. For example, 9 a.m., big numbers, 9 a.m., you wake up. Breakfast, let's draw some food colors, let's do it together. And what that does, that bonds. Especially if the child is autistic, they love their routines. If the child is ADHD, they love their high intense physical activities. Containing them, calming themselves down and saying, you be quiet for the next 20 minutes and keep quiet. You're not going to achieve that. You are not going to achieve that, because especially if the child has ADHD. So permissibility and heart and love depends on what you are actually trying to achieve. Simple as that. I hope that answers the question.
Another one, moving on. How should we find a balance between academic education and Islamic education?
How can we find a balance between academic education and Islamic education? Subhanallah. Well, any education that leads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and helping the community, first and foremost, that's to be respected, valued, and encouraged. Any form of education, doesn't matter what kind of education, whether it's academic education, whether Islamic education. And I love the terminology academic and Islamic. So are we suggesting and stating that Islamic education is not academic? And what does the term academic mean? And we have to be mindful of the language that we use, because automatically we are distinguishing between the two education. Ultimately, education is education, no matter where you get. The best form of education you're going to get, and in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is Quran and Hadith. There's nothing bigger than that. Because let me give you a lived experience. This is not a fiqhi mas'ala or hadith mas'ala or anything like that. But if you speak to our elders, those who are graduates, mashallah, PhD and postdoc and masters, and they got brilliant job and brilliant roles and etc. etc. What happens typically, we say, oh, don't disturb that person. Our parents will say, oh, don't disturb that person. It's 10 o'clock at night time, he's sleeping. He's going to wake up, or she has to wake up at 8 a.m. in the morning and go to work, high pressure job. So we as parents and as elders, as siblings, we are always on tiptoe. But if that child is alim and hafiz, the alim and hafiz is constantly thinking, Ya Allah, my parents are elderly, my brothers are, I have to be mindful of not disturbing them, etc., etc. So really we have to ask ourselves that. So in terms of balance between the two, the best form of education you will ever receive, and the best form of education that will be a zakhira for you in the hereafter, are Islamic education. Why? Because in the hadith it says the three things remain after a person dies. One of them is a neck child who makes dua for that person. So a neck child, typically a person who knows the hadith and Quran and Sunnah more, will be usually far more pious than a person who is involved in secular education. Usually you will find that. So question is, what do you want? What do I want? What do we want? We obviously want a passive bank for us once we pass away. So for that, the most important thing is hadith and Sunnah and Quran. You can't get anything better than that. Second of all, I said earlier that if a person is hafiz, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give their parents a taj, a crown on the day of judgment, which will shine like a sun. So you could imagine what that means for the person who is hafiz. Now in terms of balance, and this is a quite lengthy discussion in terms of how we can do. For me, planning a child's future from very early age is very critical. Very important. And it's a discussion that I usually have with teenagers and their parents in maktab settings. Is I say to the parents, when a parent comes to me, I want my child to become hafiz or alim, I said, have you thought about the GCSEs? Have you thought about the A levels? Have you thought about at what age they're going to do their degree? In Scotland, slightly different. They don't have GCSEs and they don't have, is it hires they call it? Hires and so forth and so forth. Have you planned all that? Because typically it takes about 3 years for a child to become hafiz, 3 to 4 years in part-time settings, 2 years to 3 years in a full-time settings. So to learn tajweed early in the beginning, to learn Quran, it takes about 12 months, depending on the style. Then another 2 years to practice that, then another 2-3 years to become a hafiz. That's 5 years gone. Learning usually starts in a formal setting, starts at the age of 7, or 6.5, 7. So that's 12 years finished. Then the pressure of GCSE starts. The 3 years minimum, 2.5 years to do door, revision of the Quran. Then that Quran will stay with you forever. Otherwise, if you don't continuously practice, Quran will leave you. Like an untied camel. If you untie the camel, it will run from you. So again, senior level. If you don't give that child, if there's no planning behind it, then in the future life, the child will suffer. Why? At the age of 16, as I said before, when a child becomes mature, baligh, they go through a number of changes, psychological changes, physiological changes, emotional changes, and they start wondering about life, meaning of life. We live in a situation that child is exposed to many different temptations. TV, free mixing, that has its own unique issues. The relationship element of life, and that has its own unique issues. The current situation about the role of Islam in Western society. We as Muslims, we believe certain belief is contradictory to our country that we live in. So these are conflicting emotions for a child has to go through. At home, he's been told, this is not your own life. This is an amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At school or outside of the environment is told that you're free life. There are a lot of conflicting emotions. So my point is, if you don't have a good balance between the two, and that is to talk with your teenager, have a plan in advance. By this age, I want the child to achieve X, Y, and Z. But don't put over expectation on that child. If you see your child is improving and doing well, encourage that child. But at all time, be on the journey with the child. I can't dictate to the child. If the child clearly has interest in sports and other things, there's no harm. I know quite a few scholars who are great footballers in amateur level, and they play football, and they have their own, and they use that as a means to engage with the youth people. But there's the scholars, they hafiz, they do tarawih, they do the imam of the masjid. There's no harm. But you want them to become doctor, but the child wants to become an artist. There's clash. So it's about working together. In terms of GCSE, if they're taking the GCSE or A levels and you want them to become hafiz and you start them at that age, I would say this is the wrong age. Because typically in A level, what are you doing? Senior highs, you are opening the mind to different perspective, critical thinking. If they do alim class, for example, that will be helpful towards that, because that also helps you to do critical thinking. But hifz class is not to do critical thinking, more to sharpen your brains and to memorization. Then that clashes with the two different forms of education. If one child is doing really good in maktab, that child naturally has to do good in school. If the child is doing really good in school, that child has to do well in maktab. It can't be other way around, because learning is same learning. Then it just goes, if they're not doing well in either one of them, the situation or the format that's been there is not good for that person. It's not conducive to that child's development. So we need to look at why. Bit long-winded answer. The parents force the child into a specific career path. Well, as parents early is, we need to be directive with the child, that's for sure. We need to be directive. But the word here is forceful. Should we be forceful? What does forceful means? If you look into the marriage concept, when two people get married, we need the permission of the wali, the guardian. And typically the guardian is the person who looks for a spouse or looks for a life partner. Then again, the guardian cannot force the person into a marriage. Why all these concepts? Is because when we are growing young, the passion of youth, our lack of experiences in life, we tend to have less understanding of the reality. Whereas someone who's 40 years of age, 50 years of age, 60 years of age, they have lived through many challenges. They have seen so many things. They understand things a bit better. They have a bit more, what's the word? A bit more wisdom about them. So when they have seen all that stuff, the parents want you to become the best in. They want you to, typically parents and the teachers want you to be the better than them. As far as I know, all the teachers and parents, they always want the next generation, the children, to be better than them. And that's why they sometimes can come across as forcing, as quite forthright, as quite directive, etc. But when you are a teenager, it's something that you need to talk to your parents openly about what you want to do. But ultimately, remember, it's for us upon the parents. It's compulsory on the parents to give you good education. That's why parents at times can be seen as forceful. But no, the force in terms of using physical chastisement, etc., they're not allowed, and that's not going to happen, and that shouldn't happen. If it does, then you're more than welcome to get in contact with us, and we can find a solution, two-way solution, inshallah, and see how we can move forward.
At what age should we stop parenting?
Never. At what age should we stop parenting? You don't stop. Never. Subhanallah. Typically, when a teenager, according to research and according to social behaviorism and things like that, and there's a lot of studies been done in this area, they found that when a child becomes baligh, number of changes takes place, and one of the greatest things is they want meaning of life. They want meaning of life. And if you look at it from Islam, he's a young adult, so we need to treat the person like adult, give them respect, give them the due. You know, when you sit next to your colleague, what do you say? You don't put that person down, do you? You don't belittle that person, you don't be directive with that person. Rather, what you are doing is, you are negotiating with that person, you're communicating at a respectful level, and so forth and so forth. Similarly, child, when it's 13, 14, 15, you want to talk to them a bit more openly, expose to them the worldly affairs. And don't hesitate to even discuss about sex and relationship. And you shouldn't. Why? Because if you don't talk about these things, they will learn it from different avenues. And if they're learning from different avenue, I can assure you it will not be right avenue. Most likely it will be wrong avenue. Because what we need to be very mindful about is we shouldn't be ashamed about discussing these things. Why we shouldn't be ashamed about discussing these things? Because remember, every element, entire lifestyle that we lead is found in Sunnah and Hadith and Quran. So Prophet ﷺ was the greatest teacher of all time, greatest human being of all time, the leader of all the Rasuls. Because of Prophet ﷺ, the entire system was created. So if he was able to discuss everything openly, then who are you and who am I not to discuss these things? Because of the ilm and its knowledge. I remember one of our ustad, hadith teacher, he was teaching us basic mas'alas in the initial stages. And what did he say? He said, remember guys, this is ilm that we are discussing. I don't want anybody to laugh and make mazak out of this, because if you do, you're effectively laughing at the Islamic knowledge. If you are laughing at Islamic knowledge, then your iman will be questioned. So really, parenting never stops. You are parenting the child at each stages until you take over the baton, i.e. your parents are no longer available, and that now you are solely parenting the child. So remember, parenting is never ever stops, but at different method, different style, different situation, different scenarios.
How does Islam view counseling?
Subhanallah, how does Islam view counseling? You are always getting counseled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a daily basis, 5 times a day. When you praying Allahu Akbar, what happens? You are walking away from the entire world. You're surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you are reading Quran, and you are prostrating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are the weakest human being in the world. You're the slave. He is the master. Allah is the master. You and I, we are nothing but slave. Then you put your head down. Then you respect. Then you appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you pour out your heart. That Allahumma inni dhulamtu nafsi dhulman kathira. That I have greatly done injustice to myself. And you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. Then you put your hand up again and you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are you doing? You're continuously talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the master. So first and foremost is you are doing counseling with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now counseling per se, in terms of modern day counseling, it's like any illnesses. If there is a cure for every single illness in the world, literally, there is a cure for every single illnesses. And I come from a social background rather than a medical background, and I don't believe in medication. I say stay away from medication as much as possible, because medication will turn you into a zombie, and it literally blocks some of the emotions, and it doesn't cure the situation. Rather, if you do counseling, and there are a variety of different types of counseling. There's talking therapy, there's art therapy, there's games therapy, there's so many, the psychotherapy, the psychosocial therapy, there's so different types of therapy. What I would always say to you is try to find a Muslim therapist, because if you don't find the Muslim therapist, then whoever you're going to, they might not understand your culture, they might not understand your beliefs, they might not understand some of the things that you stand for. There might be a value clash. If there's value clash, then they may not be able to give you the appropriate platform for you to open your heart and discuss your fears and anxieties. So in short answer, counseling is okay, and it's encouraged if you're going through problems.
There's a follow-on question from that. So my parents don't understand me and are stubborn in their ways. I ask for counselling and they think it's some bad thing.
Allah.
Due to the way Pakistanis view it. They aren't helping me. What should I do?
First and foremost, before I even attempt to answer, first and foremost, I ask every single listeners and viewers out there to say Amin to the following statement. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate all our challenges, be it physical, emotional or mental. And second Amin as well, that we pray for this young person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes away all his problems. It's unfortunately, my parents don't, they're set in their own ways, and they don't,
they're very stubborn.
They're stubborn about their mental health issues, basically.
And they don't understand you.
And they don't understand you. Ooh, Allahu Akbar. Yes. Okay, so first and foremost is, if you look into the WHO, World Health Organization, it talks about 450 million people approximately suffering from depression and anxiety and mental health issues. Out of that, I think 1/3 or 2/3 are accessing support, and rest of them are not accessing support. So approximately 100 million people officially recorded as not accessing support. Why? Because of the shame element, because of the stigma element, because of belittling element and misunderstanding element, and so many different things. So this is a key issue really. And if you go 15-20 years back in our journey, in our lifetime, about 15-20 years ago, even in the law of UK, a mental health person is defined as being spastic. It's in the law, it's the legislation of UK as spastic. And that's a very dangerous term to use, because a person who's suffering from emotional problems is not spastic, is not stupid, is not mad, is not pagal, nothing as such. It's a genuine illness that's come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we need to recognize that. So this is my plea to all the elders and all the people who don't understand mental health issues. If somebody ever says, I'm suffering with something, believe that person. If I say to you right now it's very cold out there, well, it's not cold. It's definitely cold to me. I'm shivering. You might not feel cold because it's hot to you. What's true to you is not necessarily true to me, and what's true to me is not necessarily true to you. So we have to respect that person's opinions and comments at all times. Second thing that we need to do, we need to look at it as a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving me the tawfiq to be a means, a sabab, to help that person alleviate his or her problems. That means that person is trusting me enough to open up to me. Because kullu ma'ruf is sadaqah. All the good actions are sadaqah. Everything that you do for that person, be showing the time, giving the listening ear, etc., etc., is what? It's a sadaqah. It's a good reward for us. So we should look at it as a privilege that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using me as a platform, as a tool to do good a'mal for that person. And if that person helps and it becomes cure, then for the rest of my life, whatever he does, I will be rewarded accordingly. So in terms of your parents, it's a very, very difficult one. What I always say, try to get a third party involved in a situation like that. Ideally, if you have uncles or aunties who understand the scenarios, or if you rather than going to a doctor, then getting them to liaise with them directly, then that can create a bit of strain in your relationship. I always say, see if you can get a your maktab teacher or your ustadi from the masjid or madrasa, or your uncle or aunties or your older brother to say, mom and dad, this is a genuine issue that I'm facing. So please kindly help me out. Another thing you can do is, if they don't still listen to you, give them some talks and bayans from a Muslim scholar or a research. Give it to them, tell them to study it. Because what we tend to do is we tend to show disregard to this information, and that causes more harm. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy. Other thing you can do also, you can get in contact with our office, and inshallah we'll find a plan of action for you, and we can discuss it more in depthly and to cater a specific plan for you, inshallah, between you and your parents.
Email address is on the comments.
Is the email address there?
Yeah.
Our email address is also available on the messages.
Another different viewer, actually similar to your question. How do you deal with back home parents who are a different wavelength to you?
I love the word. How do you deal with the back home parents? Subhanallah. That just goes to the disconnection between the two parties. How do you deal with the back home parents?
Who are different wavelengths to you?
Who are on a different wavelength to you. Subhanallah. Allahu Akbar. I have no answer. I'm stumped. Now I feel you. Again, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make your relationship between the two of you, the child and the parents, one of ease. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help you to understand one another. That would be amazing and that would be awesome. And I pray that, and everybody say Ameen to that, inshallah. How do you, again, if you remember the time of Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'een, we really need to study their lifestyle at this stage. Because why? Because if you think about it at the early stages of the Muslims, the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in becoming Muslims, and the parents staying kuffar and kafir, non-Muslim mushrikina Makkah, what happened? They were crying and they thought, what? I have lost my son has bigar giya, corrupted, and he has left the religion of our forefathers. That my son or my daughter has been destroyed. They're going to be astray, led by this Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, na'udhu billah. My child's life is destroyed. So what happens? The parents were completely anti-Islam, to such an extent that the Sahabas were fighting against the family members, to such an extent that they were in battle and in war, ready to, and fighting against each other. So look at the so if they were, when the Sahabas radiallahu ta'ala anhu were in Medina Munawwara, and the families were in Makkah, so back home they didn't understand them, because Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhu became Ansars and they lived in Medina. So what happens? Back home parents, back home family, there was no connection between the two. But what did the Sahabis do? What did the Sahabas do? They continued to fulfill their obligation as a child. That is the key thing. They continue to fulfill their obligation as a child towards their parents, because Quran is very clear. Birrul walidain, husn suluki, kindness, being good to your parents. Because whenever a ruling is given that is contrary to the Islamic ruling, at this stage you don't obey your parents. We don't obey our parents. But anything that they say that's not contrary to Islam, then we have to obey our parents. We have to be nice with them. We have to show good character with them at all times. And slowly, they will understand you. And now this, my way of thinking and their way of thinking, that needs to be looked into a bit more. What do you mean by our way of thinking? Are we talking about the modern day Islamic Western civilization way of thinking that is, I am free to do whatever I want to do. I'm able to go on a Saturday night, 10 o'clock in the evening, stay away, have haram relationship, drink alcohol, etc., etc. But your back home parents is saying, no, pray salah 5 times a day. Your back home parents are saying, no, don't drink alcohol, don't go to drugs, don't stay with the wrong crowds, don't eat haram, don't steal, don't fight, etc., etc. So we need to look into that a bit more. Okay, so if you were to get in contact with us, again, I could give you an individualized plan, inshallah. So it's about understanding each other. You can talk to each other, say, Mom, Dad, look, we live in UK, we live in Scotland, or we live in England, we live in Ireland, things are different, I am a Muslim. So it's about, you need to ask yourself, who are you? Are you a Muslim, or are you a Scottish Muslim, or are you Muslim Scottish, or are you Muslim European, or European Muslim? Different terminologies have different connotations, different meanings. So it's who are you, your identity. Because remember, your identity determines who you are, what you are. And that is typically the clash between the parents and the child. So it's about Muslim identity. If your Muslim identity with your parents should be same, you should be same. Inshallah, next question. I hope that satisfies.
Should daughters be allowed to pursue further education?
Subhanallah. Should daughters be allowed to pursue further education? I'm going to pass that question on to Mawlana Abdul Ghafoor Sahib. I'll tell you why. It's quite contentious. No matter how I answer this question, I might upset quite a few people, and I will make some people happy. And for that reason, I want to stay away from this contentious question. In effect, if the Islamic ruling is there and you're able to fulfill, who is the greatest female scholar of all time? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Hazrat Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha. She was the greatest scholar of all time in females. And all the Sahabas and all the great Sahabas went to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would go to Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha constantly and say, Ya Ummat al-Mu'mineen, what is this? What is the situation for this? So if she was educated, should the ladies be educated also? Of course they should be educated. But the environment has to be correct. That is key.
We've got lots of questions, but we'll take one final question now.
Okay.
We'll answer the rest of them in the next live session.
Inshallah.
So the last question is, can you explain the importance of the Muslim community to help our brothers and sisters in humanity during these challenging times, regardless of the difference in faith?
Subhanallah, this is such a long question. Can you say, and I will repeat it?
Can you explain the importance
of the Muslim community?
Of the Muslim community
To help our brothers and sisters?
To help our brothers and sisters,
yeah. In humanity, yeah.
During these challenging times,
regardless of their differences.
regardless of the differences of faith. Of course. I mean, I can't stress this enough, because every Muslim is a brothers and every woman are sisters. We're all brothers, and we have to look out for each other. I mean, one thing that I noticed when I moved to Scotland was how all the different part of the communities are sticking together and are very friendly and courteous and respectful. And to me, this is quite new to me. I'm going to say unfortunately, because it should have been far more evident in other places around UK. And despite that, it's still not enough, even here as well. But I have to say, in comparison to other places, we are quite fortunate in many ways. So let's celebrate that and let's say Alhamdulillah. Of course, there's always room for improvements. Of course, I mean, one thing that I've noticed, there are a lot of charities out there doing a lot of work for a lot of people, giving food. In fact, our masjid as well, we're giving out food 3 days a week. We're also giving food packs on a Monday after evening for those. 900 food packs.
900 food packs evening, every other Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Subhanallah, amazing. So I advise all those people that are in need of food packs, please come between 5 to 7 and take that. Also, you're more than welcome to get in contact with our office numbers if you're worried about anything, something is bothering you. There will always be someone available at the other end of phone calls. We have
regardless of faith.
Regardless of faith, of course, subhanallah, I forgot to mention that. There's 900 food packs available for anybody. If you're in need,
do not hesitate to come in contact with us. And if you genuinely have a vulnerability, we will deliver that food to you. If you're a vulnerable client group, we will deliver that food to you, inshallah. So of course, there are a lot of projects that are taking place, but is this enough? Of course not. There's a lot of things we can do, because there's never enough. Because the moment you say that's it, then the only route is downwards. We need to improve and do more things for our neighbors. Neighbors have right over us. Our family and society, our colleagues have right over us. After this lockdown, what I've noticed is the people that I would see on a regular basis in namaz time, I hardly get to see them anymore. In fact, the communication with them has ceased. To such an extent, I feel quite bad about this. Otherwise, I would see them, I would say, Assalamu alaikum, we'll spend 2-3 minutes after namaz time, or 5 minutes after namaz time, or 5-10 minutes before namaz time. There was this buzz and social gathering. I've noticed my friendship circle is coming closer and smaller. The quantity has come reduced, the quality may have increased. But the point is, we all have responsibilities to exercise more patience, look out for each other, be it on social media, be it on phone, be it on Facebook, be it on WhatsApp. We need to utilize this platform for the right way. Otherwise, we will end up using this platform for the wrong purposes, and that will be detrimental to us. So I encourage everybody, whether you are praying 8 rakat or 20 rakats, or whether you're doing either one day before us or either after one day after us, or whether you have started Ramadan one day or day before, day after, whatever the differences may be, we have to look out for every single one of us, because we have prayed La ilaha illallah. And whether you have prayed La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah or not, it doesn't matter. Human beings, we need to be humans and show humanity to everybody. We can't even break a branch on a tree without a valid reason, let alone hurting a human being or animal, anything like that. We can't. We have to be respectful to everybody. And I hope that answers everybody. And I pray to everyone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviates all the challenges that we are going through very, very quick, and help us to pass this test. Ameen.
That's a bit of time. Many questions will aim to answer.
Inshallah. That's unfortunately, everybody, this is we are finished for today. And inshallah, next time I will reduce my speech in the initial stages, allowing you to give more time for your questions. And with that, whatever has been said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts us. And whatever has been said good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those that are not been beneficial, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.